Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Gamerpreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Carlton. Today I have a very special guest with us. I have an attorney, Marius Adomnica. Hello, how's it going today?
How's it going? Good.
So, what would you like me to call you? Attorney, doctor? Like, I go by doctor myself.
Just Marius.
Marius it is. Okay. So Marius, why don't you go ahead and begin by telling us just a little bit about yourself?
So I'm a lawyer in Canada. I practice esports law. I've been a lawyer for about 8 years. I've practiced esports law for the past 2 or 3. When esports started taking off, I started broadening my practice in that area.
Fantastic. Okay. So before we kind of get into that, I start every interview with one question. I'm going to ask you it just the same as everybody else. Sure. So on a scale of 1 to 10, because I want to make this fun, 1 to 10, how weird are you, Marius?
Say solid 7 or 8.
All right. Why is that?
I know everyone's a bit weird in their own way, right? Like,
sure. You got to be a little bit crazy being an attorney, right?
Yeah, no.
All right. There will be no attorney jokes here, I promise.
Make them if you want. That's totally fine. I've heard all of them. So.
As have I. Okay. So let's kind of get your gamer cred before we get into like the legal stuff. And so when did you first start playing video games?
Since I don't even remember, like since I was a kid, since I was like 2 or 3 years old. Like
okay.
My parents were computer programmers and we had a computer at home and I played old like MS-DOS games and stuff like that. And
very cool. I was right there with you. My dad was a tinkerer, so he built our computer. And I've yet to find it, but there was a chess game. It was checkers. Checkers was 3D. So there was like multiple levels of checkers. It was so cute. And I've never seen anything like it again. But back then they had some really creative stuff.
Yeah. They had like battle chess, I think.
Yeah.
Which is basically, since you're talking about that, like it was basically just chess, but the pieces actually fought when you moved and stuff like that.
It's fun looking back on it, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Games are coming a long way.
All right. So what kinds of things do you play? Do you even have time to play? I know how busy I was when I was an attorney.
Not a lot less now than before. When I was in university, just kind of did what I wanted. Now I still game once in a while. I play Dota, Hearthstone, some other mobile stuff. I play a lot more on mobile now than on a PC, just because I can do it for like 15 or 20 minutes at a time, like if I'm
absolutely
eating lunch or stuff like that.
All right, so what's your favorite game of all time? Would you say then?
All time? Oh Jesus, I wouldn't have a specific one. I mean, I have a soft spot for like the Battlefield series, like Battlefield 2. I put a lot of time into that game back in the day, so that's one that's outside of the whole Zeldas and Mario and like kind of like the traditional answers to the questions, mm-hmm. Something like that. It's probably up there for me. Okay. But I wouldn't say I have like one specific game.
Sure thing. Okay. I think that's good. How about this? Can you kind of walk me through how you even got into the esports industry? Because I'll tell you, I had never heard of this being an option when I was practicing.
It wasn't when I was in law school either, and when I started practicing. I mean, I used to go to like bar crafts and stuff back in the day and like watch old like StarCraft videos on YouTube and stuff like that. But I had no idea that there was like a potential real business behind it the way it's kind of turned out to be in the last 2 or 3 years. So I kind of got into it because I work for like a technology firm. We do a lot of like techie stuff, like stuff in this area. And I've been a gamer all my life, and I thought that's kind of like my niche. Instead of doing, personal injury and lease reviews and stuff like that, if I can focus on that, I can at least work on an area that interests me. And I also thought I'd have like a bit of an advantage because like I am a gamer, and actually surprisingly not a lot of lawyers play games. I don't know why it is. Like I remember in law school, like my class had like 200 people. I think only like 2 or 3 of them like played games or knew what like World of Warcraft or something was. I think maybe there's something about your brain that if you're into law, it makes you less likely to be into video games. There's something there. So I thought just having that background and like understanding when somebody's talking about like what the games are, how you play, etc., like that'll be a niche for me. And I just kind of started meeting local people in the industry. I started writing a blog, and it just kind of snowballed from there piece by piece.
Okay. So it's funny you mentioned that. I remember when I was in law school, it was much the same. Like no one seemed to play video games. So I always felt alone because I was definitely a gamer. And that was my last year of law school. It's like everybody just came out as gamers. And, you know, like where were you guys the past 2 years? I could have been hanging out with you.
Yeah, everyone was doing it secretly. Nobody wanted to like put it out there. Yeah, they were kind of embarrassed about it, I guess, right?
But definitely, I don't think I met a single attorney who honestly had any fun, let alone played video games when I was practicing. It just stuck to themselves, really. Okay. So can you kind of walk me through your professional history as an attorney? That way we can kind of see your progression until where you got to here.
Yeah, so I started out in Canada. You have to do something called articling for a year after law school. So that's kind of like how a doctor does a residency. You're not really a lawyer, but you're working in a law office to get like practical experience. I did that in a completely different field than where I'm working at now. I did it in like a sort of a public interest type firm. We worked on like when Occupy Wall Street came to Vancouver, they had a little tent city here, and we represented them. We did this big case about assisted suicide, that's for the courts, like all this kind of stuff, like constitutional law, that kind of stuff. And then I just kind of did my own thing after articling for a couple of years. I worked like on contract corporate lawyers. I was looking for like, you know, a job where like that kind of fit in with kind of what I want to do. I wanted to work in tech, something, you know, interesting, that kind of thing. And a lot of sort of traditional legal paths don't really interesting that much. So I just kind of, you know, I did some work on the side, contract work for lawyers while I looked for like a good situation for me. Then I found this firm where I'm at. I've been here for about 5.5 years now. And yeah.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so let's kind of get into the nuts and bolts of esports law. It's what kind of like what field of law would it fall under if you didn't have the title esports law?
I don't think there's nothing really. There's very little about esports law that is specific to esports. Maybe like player contracts and stuff like that. That's kind of something that you have to have like esports experience to deal with. But 90% of the stuff I do for my esports clients is kind of general legal stuff. Like I have a few clients who are opening like esports arenas, so I do their leases. And, you know, it's just like negotiating any other lease, basically. You have to know what they're doing, and like there's some little bits here and there where the esports angle matters, but a lot of it's just a standard lease review, a lot of just in the esports context. Same thing, like when you're doing people's employment agreements, consulting agreements, it's mostly the same as doing that kind of stuff for any other company. So a lot of it is the legal part is the same. It's more the issue of understanding like what their business is, because people don't want to explain to their lawyer, you know, what streaming is, what esports is, like how like their business works. And it's basically understanding that stuff in the context of a legal stuff. That's what I'd say esports law is really. There's not that much stuff that's really specific to esports.
Okay.
It's just general law in the esports context, basically, I'd say.
Okay, wonderful. So for you and I, this stuff's kind of like old hat. Like you're saying, oh, it's just a lease review. And I've looked at God knows how many leases, I understand. But for the average person, like this is kind of, it's new, it's scary, it's exciting. And I know you can't obviously you're not going to give any specific advice, and you wouldn't, but kind of generally, what kinds of things should people be looking out for? Is like, and obviously always hire an attorney whenever you have a legal matter, but people don't know what legal matters are until they get smacked in the face by them. So what should they be watching out for?
Are you talking more in terms of somebody opening like a business or players, or?
Let's silo it for a second. Let's talk players, and then we'll go to businesses.
Players, I mean, yeah, players, I'd say just get legal advice, period, on a contract. I think one really common thing in the industry that, you know, I hear people talk this all the time, especially in legal circles, is that when somebody gets an offer from a team, they're just so excited, especially most of the time they're just like a young kid. A lot of them are like actually under the age of majority. But they're kind of sign anything, won't even look at it. They'll just be like, oh, great, I'm signed by this team and it's awesome. And
yeah, that's assuming they get something in writing. Could just be a tweet.
Yeah. So I'd say, you know, don't just be excited and sign whatever they put in front of you. Have somebody look at it. A lot of the time, you can get locked into something you had no idea that you were, and you have problems later on. Like that best example right now is the Tifu lawsuit that's going on, where he got locked in for 3 or 4 years, and his value just increased so much over the length of that contract that he was like, I really shouldn't have signed this, essentially. So that's one thing. Just get basic legal advice. I think that's becoming more of a norm in the industry. Like a lot of the time, people were like, well, I don't want to get a lawyer. It's considered rude. I don't want to ruffle feathers. But now that's probably becoming less of an issue. So just go out there and get some kind of advice on contract. That's what I say for players.
Okay. Yeah. And on the business side?
The business side, it really depends on what your business
such a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. It depends, right? That's classic lawyer answer. You say, it does depend because there's so many different things you would have to be doing. Like if you're opening like an arena or something, that's different from if you're building an app. But I'd say just talk to somebody, even if it's like off the record. Even if you're not necessarily going to retain a lawyer to just like do the whole thing and the incorporation and the shareholders and all that stuff, like know what you're getting into. And, be aware that if you're going to go into it without doing that stuff, you're taking like a lot of risks. People don't care about the legal stuff until they sort of remember that they haven't done it. And then it bites them in the word I can't say on this podcast. And they're like, oh, I should have done that. So
that's right.
It's kind of like treat it as insurance almost. Like you put a little bit of effort and money into it now because later on you're going to cause yourself a lot more problems if you don't do it. So that kind
Absolutely. Now, what would you say to someone who maybe is in a situation where they could use legal advice, but then turns to a friend rather than going to the attorney?
A lot of the time that's not necessarily a good idea. It depends on what the friends know. A lot of the time people think they know a lot more than they do. And in some situations, it's actually worse to know it a little bit than to know nothing, because knowing it a little bit, you think you're on the right path, but there's this other sort of giant elephant in the room that you're not aware of that can sort of fully turn around and mess everything up for you. So it's better to get advice from somebody who has the full context of everything that's going on.
Okay.
Mind, essentially.
Fantastic. So I'm sitting here, I'm trying to put myself into the position of someone who has need of an attorney. And, you could honestly need an attorney for basically every aspect of your life. And I understand that. But maybe I don't have enough money to hire someone. Maybe I'm a little skittish about, seeming like I'm standoffish by doing so. Are there any resources out there that might be able to give them just enough to know to be able to who to hire?
I wouldn't say there's not like a database of anything of esports lawyers or anything like that right now. Like that's partly because there aren't that many of us. There's probably like in all of North America, there's like, I'd say maybe like 20 people who practice this kind of law. It's expanding now that it's kind of blowing up. So like every large firm I see has on their websites now. It used to be for a gaming division. Now it's for gaming and esports division, stuff like that. But in terms of people who do a lot of it day to day, there's not that many of them. There's an esports bar association that just got founded a couple of years ago. But aside from that, I would say just Google or ask people in the industry. Like generally for the whole game of telephone, the 6 degrees of separation thing, somebody will know somebody in the industry who's done this before.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably your best bet.
Wonderful. Okay. So let's kind of talk about you, if I can, for a little bit. So that's the law side of it. What do you wish you had known when you were first starting out as an attorney that maybe have been able to kickstart your career on this side of it?
Are you talking about in terms of like for other lawyers or just in general?
So you personally, so at you've been with this firm for 5 years and you were doing stuff before that as well, but you've only been doing the esports side of it for 3 years. If someone had come to you, 6 years ago and said, if you do this, all your dreams will come true. What would you say if you were that person given the advice?
I'd say one thing, and just getting out there and putting your name out there and like networking. That's very important, especially if you're like in the industry when it's just starting out, because there's basically like or there was a few years ago, like a huge vacuum of information and people who are willing to do this in the industry. Okay. There was a few people down in the States who kind of like sort of placed their bet on esports long before like it actually took off and became a huge thing. Bryce Plum is one guy in the States. He's probably the most prominent esports lawyer right now. Another guy named Ryan Morrison. So I'd say I wish I would have gotten into this sooner, basically, and just when it was kind of taking off, or before it was taking off, essentially. And just going all in, sort of. I think one thing they did was sort of like Bryce opened like an esports only law firm, which is at that time was kind of probably a pretty big risk. If you're a solo and you're just starting out, it's not that huge a risk because like you're not giving up like some huge 6-figure job or 7-figure job or something. But sort of being all in on esports and like not just doing it as a side thing and just showing that you're, there to help the community and stuff like that. I think that helps.
Wonderful. All right. So you've been in it for a few years. Where do you see the whole industry going in the next 5?
Oh boy. That's tough to say. It's still, there's so many sort of different threads out there going on. I am a bit worried there's going to be a bit of like of a market correction, or, people are talking about an esports bubble, because there's just so much investment and so much hype the last like a year or two, that's almost never a good sign when people just start putting in so much money and without really, in a lot of cases, looking at the actual financials of a business. And
okay.
I think at some point we're going to start seeing some bad news about esports that kind of like dampens the hype a little bit. I think the Overwatch League right now is kind of like, I call it the canary in the coal mine for esports. If it doesn't continue to do well, if there's like negative news stories that come out in the next year or two, then that'll maybe put a damper and it'll be like a bit of a hiccup in the growth of the industry. I think long term, I think the industry is going to still be huge. I saw somebody post this line on Twitter earlier today that every minute, like one baseball fan dies and 2 esports fans are born. So just the overall numbers are there. Like you can't. That's the big giant elephant in the room that you can't sort of argue against. Whether like how the industry is going to mature and like take advantage of all those fans, like that still remains to be seen. Like I honestly think streamers and content creators are actually going to be a lot bigger in the future than traditional like competitive esports. I think the real industry is sort of like, I like to say, people watching other people play video games, and esports is a part of that, but I wouldn't say necessarily even the main part of that. Like right now, if you look, like I think way more time gets spent by people watching streamers than watching competitive esports. I think
that's right.
Yeah, when the proverbial kids come home from school, they turn on like Ninja or like their favorite streamer. They don't necessarily watch the professional Overwatch or Dota or stuff like that. So.
Okay. Do you think the legal profession is going to be able to catch up with it? Because if there's only a handful of guys out there doing this, then there's just a drought.
Yeah, I think it'll grow. Like, if there's people starting businesses and there's investor money being poured into the space, like I think the legal will follow. I think that's definitely starting to happen now. So I think there'll be no shortage of lawyers who are market themselves as esports lawyers or practice more in the field. So I don't think that's going to be a problem for the industry moving forward. Like I think, lawyers, accountants, professionals, they all follow the money. If there's money in the industry, people learn how to do it. So I think we'll be, and that part of it, they'll be playing lawyers, I think, who want to do this kind of work, especially because it's kind of like a cool field to be in. It's kind of like entertainment law. Like it's a lot more fun to be like, I'm an esports lawyer than just say like, I'm a real estate lawyer or like
contracts lawyer,
employment lawyer or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. So what's something that you're trying to improve then in yourself and your skill? So like what fields are you focusing more on because you kind of see that as developing more?
It really varies, like with stuff that comes in. Generally when the client has, or a few clients in some circumstances have like an issue, that's when I start like looking into it more and sort of broadening my expertise in that area. So for example, we've had a few people recently come in to talk about like they want to run sort of esports mini tournaments, kind of like, I don't want to say daily fantasy for esports because you're actually playing in the tournaments, but basically many esports tournaments online, like sites where you can purchase like 1 million tournaments and you can log in with 10 of your friends and you each put in $5 and whoever does the best in that Fortnite game wins, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I've been looking into like the legal implications of that, for example, and like,
do you have any insights into that? Because I actually have connected with quite a few people on LinkedIn fairly recently. They're all trying to start up organizations basically doing that. Like, is that legal? Because my alarm bells go off when I hear that, because that sounds like gambling and, you know.
Yes. So, but general answer to that, like I know a lot of these sites, so they're doing it on the skill games model essentially. So they're saying we're not gambling, we're a game of skill, and therefore we're not subject to gambling laws.
Okay.
Which is, it's a defensible position, I think, for most games. So it turns on the issue of whether, like, a game is, there's legal definitions for when a game's a game of chance or mixed chance of skill, where when it's gambling and you need licensing to do it and all that, or when it's a game of skill and you're fine. And yeah, the issue is, is League of Legends or is Dota or Hearthstone, that's probably the worst example to use because there's so much RNG, but are these games of skill or games of chance? And you literally have to look at each game and look at how the mechanics work and see how much chance is involved and how much skill, and see where the position is sort of defensible, but it's a game of skill.
Okay. All shades of gray, isn't it?
Sorry?
All shades of gray, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, no one really knows until somebody's going to actually gets taken to court over this and we actually have some law in it. Until then, you can sort of try to predict things based on existing law on this, but there's not a lot of existing law applying these concepts and the concepts like video games. Most of the law is about, like poker or weird games people kind of like made up for like county fairs and stuff like that.
Okay.
I'm actually curious to see like what'll happen when one of these actually goes to court and court actually has to decide on the issue.
So it sounds like this is the Wild West of the legal world and you're an esports cowboy.
Well, it's definitely the Wild West, I think. Yeah, it's when I looked at all of these sites, actually, I was kind of reminded a bit of like of DraftKings and daily fantasy sites. So they were doing it. They were operating in kind of great area for years and years, and everyone was kind of fine with it. And people just operated on the assumption that it was legal. And then, they started running all those ads, and they got some bad PRs and some bad PR, and suddenly all these AGs were like, oh, actually, it's not legal, or et cetera, et cetera. And they just started getting inundated with all these lawsuits and et cetera, et cetera. So I can see something like that happening with all these sites essentially. Like right now they're kind of flying under the radar and no one's paying attention, but as maybe one or two of them become bigger and people started paying more attention, suddenly you're going to see more regulatory scrutiny, let's say.
Okay,
we'll
fantastic.
See what happens there.
Oh, thank you so much. You've given such valuable insights. I'm sure hopefully somebody, watching this is able to like realize they need an attorney. I've been out of the game for years now, and I'm still like my standard answer is just talk to an attorney. It's a business question. Talk to an attorney first, then I'll deal with it.
That's probably the best answer to give.
Right? There's no way around it. You need an attorney for basically every aspect of your life.
Yeah.
So Marius, how do people find you? Where can you? What's your website? What social media you have?
I'm on Twitter. My handles, I believe, at Marius Adomnica, or if you just Google me, Marius Adomnica, esports lawyer. I also run a blog called The Patch Notes, www.thepatchnotes.com. Yeah, that's basically it.
Wonderful. All right. So before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to tell or suggest or ask, or anything else you want to talk about?
Nothing directly, nothing off the top of my mind.
Okay. Well, wonderful. In that case, I'm going to thank you so much for coming on and giving us your insights. It really was valuable.
No problem. Happy to do it.
All right. Gamerpreneurs, on that note, I'm going to tell you all, take it easy. Hey, if you like this podcast, I'd love to invite you to check out a little bit more about me, Dr. Bradford Carlton, Gamerpreneur. If you go to my website, www.thegamerpreneur.com/bonus, I'm going to give you a free copy of my book, The Warcraft of Business, where I explain my history in both gaming and business and how I brought the two together in order to create some very successful companies and help a lot of people. And all you got to do is pay for shipping and processing, and I'll send you this book. I absolutely know you're going to love it. All right. You all take it easy.